With the legislative update and how we got here, we're going to go back really to about 2020 when the COVID situation happened. It really escalated a situation that had been occurring in Michigan for a while before that. In the last decade, the public schools in Michigan have lost over 150,000 students that have left the public school system for greener pastures and private schools and homeschools. And this obviously represents an enormous amount of revenue because today each child is worth over $14,300 per child when you count federal, state, and local taxes. So you multiply that by 150,000 students, it's a massive amount of revenue that has been lost to the public school system. And so when you read the articles that Dr. Rice was interviewed in 21 and 22, he and some of his associates were very forthright about why they wanted to have a homeschool registration bill, which he was calling for every year. And they made statements like, one child leaving the public school system is one child too many. And we need to find a way to get these children back into the public schools. And so the homeschool registration bill initially was very forthrightly discussed as being something that they needed to be able to track the homeschoolers with the intent of somehow getting them either physically back into the public schools or at least in a public school homeschool partnership where they get the money for the student, even if they don't have the student physically in the building. And so that has been really the push since 2020, but in 2023 the narrative flipped. And suddenly the narrative became that we need a homeschool registry because homeschoolers are child abusers. And so this has been of great concern to us to have this kind of a caricature of homeschoolers, even though research has demonstrated that that is a fallacious caricature. So when Dr. Michael Rice last year, January 5th, said that he wanted to have the legislature introduce a registration bill, we went and met with Representative Matt Colzar, who is generally from this area, I think over in Plymouth, and talked with him about his intentions and if he was going to be trying to create or institute this policy that Dr. Rice wanted. And at that time, at the end of February of 2023, he assured us that homeschoolers were not on his radar. He was not planning to register homeschoolers, weren't even really thinking about them. They had a lot of things they wanted to do in the public schools, had some things they wanted to change about the charter schools, but homeschoolers weren't really something that he was going to concern himself with. But then fast forward about 9 months and he tweeted out, actually retweeted a post from Attorney General Dana Nessel. And he said, Michigan is one of only 11 states that doesn't count registered homeschooled children. And abusive parents are taking advantage of that to avoid being found out. It's time to support all Michigan students and change that. Michigan cannot allow this loophole to continue. And then he again tweeted this post from Dana Nessel, who said, the Brown and Flore families preyed upon dozens of children who were removed from previously abusive biological homes and subjected the children to prolonged, routine, and systemic mental and physical abuse under the guise of discipline. So she mentions these two families specifically, and then she followed up the next day, December 6th, with this post. The homeschooling environment allowed abuse in the Flore home to go unnoticed. Implementing monitoring mechanisms is crucial to ensure that all children, including those homeschooled, receive necessary protections. So I didn't know anything about these two families, but I saw the press release that went out like a day or two before her posts. And there were just a few things that I noticed when I read through the press release that were kind of red flags for me, that jumped out to me, and I thought, this just doesn't add up. So one of the things was that these were foster children, and by Michigan law, foster children are not allowed to be homeschooled in our state. And so I became curious as to how did this become a homeschool issue when these are foster children. The other thing that was curious was that she said that these parents had exploited the system in an attempt to get rich. Now, I've never been a foster care parent, but a little bit that I know about it, I'm pretty sure there are easier ways to get rich I don't know, I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say there's probably an easier way to try to do that. But she also complained about the number of children that had been placed in these two homes over time, I don't know, 15 years or more. As many as 30 children had been placed by the state into these two homes. And the complaint was this was way too many children and that was wildly irresponsible. It never should have happened. And so therefore, all homeschoolers in Michigan need to be regulated. Can you follow that logic? Yeah, I couldn't either. So I'm trying to figure out how does this correlate somehow to be a homeschool issue, because I'm a homeschooling parent and I didn't place those 30 children into those two families, those two homes. That was not something I did. Maybe you did, I don't know, but I'm thinking none of us placed those children there. To me, that would have been a decision that was done by the foster care system and by Child Protective Services and Department of Health and Human Services. So if they put those 30 children into those specific two homes over a period of like 15 years, which is basically how long they're claiming that this abuse was ongoing, wouldn't that say that there's some sort of a problem within those agencies? That there's a need for reform within those agencies? And then the argument that these children were unknown. Well, they were not unknown. When they were foster children, they were in the public school system. When they were being fostered, in foster care, they were connected deeply to Child Protective Services, DHHS, and CPS. In fact, Mr. Brown, one of the fathers, was actually employed by DHHS as a Child Protective Service investigator. That was his day job. He worked for CPS. Wow. So he's not unknown to them. There's nothing whatsoever unknown about these children. They're around mandatory government reporters all day, every day in the public school system and with these agencies in which they are deeply connected. So again, to say that there's a loophole in the homeschool law that allowed for abuse to happen chronically in these two homes for 15 years or however long it just doesn't add up. And so I saw an article as I went and did some research about this in the Lansing Journal, and this was from April 28th of 23. And I noticed that one of the attorneys who was representing the Flore family was a man by the name of David Coleman. Now he's with Great Lake Justice Center in Lansing, Michigan. And that name might be familiar to some of you, especially if you've ever been to the annual Inch Convention that our organization puts on in Lansing, because he has spoken at every one of the Inch Conventions since the very first one in 1984. He is also the attorney that won the two state Supreme Court cases that ended up legalizing homeschooling in Michigan back in the early 1990s, the DeYoung case and the Bennett case. So he is a Christian man. He is a big proponent and supporter of the homeschool community, and he's also a personal friend of mine. And so I picked up the phone and I called him and said, Dave, I just saw that you had represented these the Flore family, one of the families, and I said, I don't know anything about these families, but I know something about you and your character, and I just don't believe that you would have represented children or parents of children who were being abused. And he said, the story that was spun in the media and by the prosecution has been egregiously false. In fact, just to give you a couple quotes from the Lansing State Journal, he called the case against them as pathetic and ridiculous, wild claims that turned out to be totally false. And then he explained how at the end of April of 2023, all charges against both of these families, after having been through a thorough CPS investigation, having gone to court, all charges against both families were dropped by the state of Michigan because there was no evidence of abuse. So Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, has chosen to re-prosecute these families. Again, after they've already been through the process, the state of Michigan said there was no evidence, but now with no new incidents, with really no new cases of alleged abuse, they are retrying this family, which if you know anything about the Fifth Amendment of the Supreme Court, they call that double jeopardy, and it is a violation of the US Supreme Court. So this is a very interesting situation, and in fact, one of the adult daughters of the Flore family, her name is Shamber Rain, she contacted me, and she said, I was raised as a foster child, I was adopted, and she said some of the children after they were adopted were homeschooled for a time. So that's where the homeschool accusation came in. But she said she's married actually to one of the sons from the Brown family, so there is kind of an interconnection there between the two families through her marriage. But she has been very vocal on her social media and to any actual media that will talk to her, claiming that these charges against her parents and the Brown parents are completely false. In fact, this is a quote from her social media page on Facebook. She said, "My punishments," talking about when she was growing up in the home with the Flore family, "my punishments varied from timeouts to groundings to meditating on what I did wrong, but beat and abused was never a punishment." And then at the bottom of this article from themessenger.com, it says that her mom is her best friend. And so I asked her, well, why then are they going after the Brown family? I said, how many of the Brown children are accusing their parents of child abuse? She said 0. And I said, well, what motivation would they have to prosecute them then? She said, well, Mr. Brown is a Christian, he is a conservative, he works in child protective services where most people are on the other side of the political and social spectrum. And she said, I believe that they were out to get him, and so they fired him and accused him of child abuse. And I said, so what about your family? What could possibly be the motivation for them going after you? She said, well, all of the children in both families who were adopted through a Catholic adoption agency called St. Vincent's. And because they're Roman Catholic, they have a religious conviction not to place children into homes where they don't have a biological mother and father who are married to one another. So they will not place adopted children into, say, a home with an LGBTQ individual or couple. And so Dana Nessel, who, as you probably know, is married to a woman and is very outspokenly lesbian, she didn't like that and prosecuted St. Vincent's to force them to violate their religious conscience. And Shamber Rain became a public spokesperson against that prosecution. And she spoke up in the media against Dana Nessel. Dana Nessel ended up losing the case against St. Vincent's, which apparently she's not used to and doesn't appreciate. And so Shamber Rain said, I believe this was the motivation for her personally going after our family. So they're being prosecuted again after having already been through this. In fact, the Detroit News just came out with an article 2 or 3 days ago that exposes a bunch of false allegations, false reporting on the part of Child Protective Services related to these two families. So the story just broke a couple of days ago in the Detroit News. You can look that up online. So additionally to this story, you have to factor in the Washington Post. Over the past year, they've been doing a series of stories attacking homeschooling in a rather egregious way. They have caricatured homeschoolers as being Nazis, plenty of accusations of homeschoolers being child abusers, and they've played really fast and loose with data, with so-called facts, to present a story that is not accurate. So, for example, there was a story that came out here December 6th, the same day as these tweets by Dana Nessel and Representative Matt Colzar. So really, the Washington Post story motivated them to act on that, and like now's the time to try to push for regulations of homeschoolers in Michigan. But the story that reporter Peter Jameson told in the Post was about a boy named Roman Lopez who was living in Michigan with his mother and father. They divorced. His father moved to California, remarried, and his new wife, unfortunately, hated his son. It's a very tragic story. It's a heart-rending story, but unfortunately, she egregiously abused this little boy and eventually killed him in California. And so Peter Jameson's story in the Washington Post was that because this stepmother killed her stepson in California, we need all homeschoolers in Michigan to be regulated. Are you following that? Can you track the logic? Yeah, I couldn't either. So I told Peter Jameson that he was being dishonest with the public in the way that he was covering this. And his argument to me was, well, what's so bad about a registration law if it saves one child's life? Wouldn't it be worth it? Wouldn't it be worth a little bit of inconvenience if it saved this one little boy's life? And I said, Peter, here's the fallacy, and you know this because you've researched this enough. This boy didn't die in Michigan, he died in California. And California has that very law that you're saying Michigan needs. They have an annual reporting law in California. As a homeschooler, you have to report your child every single year with the state, and he still died. That law did not keep him safe. And I said, by definition, lawbreakers don't obey laws. So we actually have laws already in Michigan and in California that say you're not allowed to abuse your child. And yet, sadly, criminals do. And we even have laws in Michigan and California that say you're not allowed to kill your child. And yet this woman did. The law, the regulation did not protect this child. Regulations are not going to save a child's life in a situation like that, sadly, right? And simply having a child's name in a centralized government-controlled education database keeps absolutely no children safe. So if a parent is hell-bent on abusing their child, what they will do when there's a registration law is they will either ignore that law, not report, and then keep abusing their child, or they will report, register their child, and then keep abusing them. And you know absolutely nothing more about what's happening behind closed doors in that child's home when you have 50,000 homeschool families on this centralized education database. You know absolutely nothing more about what happens in their homes than you did before you had the centralized education database. It keeps absolutely zero children safe. We also have some research that has been done on academic performance and also on child abuse rates. And we have comparisons between highly regulated states like New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, and then low regulation states like Texas, Idaho, and Michigan. And we know that when homeschooled students take standardized tests, that they tend to perform about the same on average in the low regulation states as they do in the high regulation states, even states where they're mandated to take standardized tests. Like Michigan, you're not, but in some of the regulated states you are. And we actually have data from both states. We have standardized tests by those who have been done so voluntarily, and then we have those who are mandated, and the scores are about the same in the low regulation states and the high regulation states. So there's absolutely no academic improvement for homeschoolers who are in high regulation states. And the other thing that we know is we have child abuse records across all of the states of people who are in public school, who are in private school, who are in homeschool, who have abused children. And sadly, you will find child abuse in every single sector of culture and under every kind of demographic group, sadly. Because it's a sinful human condition, is the problem. But you don't have higher degrees of child abuse in low regulation homeschool states than you do in high regulation. So it does not provide less child abuse, and it also does not provide better academics. It gives absolutely no value in terms of the child's benefit. What it does is it creates more government control and capacity for far greater government control. So Washington Post, here on December 6th, quoted Matt Colzar as saying that the legislature is likely to see a bill that would at a bare minimum require the registration of homeschooled children in Michigan and perhaps establish additional oversight measures. I was on CBS TV in Detroit on December 6th, the same day that the tweets went out, the same day the Washington Post came out. I was on CBS television with Matt Colzar, the two of us, and the reporter asked him a question that was brilliant, and she said, I imagine a lot of parents would say, surely they will want to know more than just knowing where the children are. I mean, receiving a letter that says this child is homeschooled, surely there would have to be some kind of home visits, some interaction, right? And Representative Colzar said, it's fair to say that. But I think right now, the main thing we need to do is find out where they are. So what I've learned about bureaucrats is when they tell you they're planning to take your rights away from you, you should listen to them, because they probably are. So we have them on record saying that there will probably be additional oversight measures. It's not merely a registration. The registration is simply the first foot in the door. Again, this was at the end of December 28th. Greater oversight is likewise on the agenda in Michigan, one of 11 states where homeschooling is essentially unregulated. Now that's not true. We do have a homeschool law in Michigan. You are required by law to teach 9 academic subjects in your home as a parent or legal guardian in an organized educational manner. We have a code that has worked really well for 30 years in the state of Michigan. It's called Exemption F. You can actually incorporate as a private school and homeschool that way, but most people homeschool under Exemption F. And it says that state legislators there are poised to take up a regulatory bill in 2024. They also say a fight is brewing in Michigan where legislators say they are preparing a bill that would require parents to notify the state that they're homeschooling. This policy is meant to make it harder for parents who homeschool to hide child abuse. When you read through the articles in the Post, you read through the tweets, the comments from Attorney General Nessel, from Matt Colzar, from Dr. Michael Rice, and these others, they have consistently banged the drum, child abuse, child abuse, child abuse, child abuse. And then I was on ABC television just this last week here in Detroit. Matt Colzar was also on there, and he says, they keep twisting my words to make it sound like I'm saying homeschoolers are child abusers. Well, the fact is you tweeted that. Like, I mean, I don't know, what did you want us to think? So it's kind of interesting how he's backpedaling now, trying to get away from his own comments, but it is what he said repeatedly to the media and also in social media. So basically, Washington Post again, 28, said that Stephanie Chang, who introduced a very draconian homeschool bill back in 2015, they told me personally that she still wants to get her bill passed. The one that she wrote and that we killed, Mission killed in 2015, she wants that to pass as she wrote it. And because of the way that the legislature was made up in 2015, we had a majority of people who believed in parental rights, who were in control of the legislature. And so we were able to kill her very draconian bill with 2 phone calls. We called the House Education Committee chair and the Senate Education Committee chair, and we said, this is a bad bill, don't let this out of committee. And they said, it's dead, it'll never go anywhere, we'll make sure of that. So we killed that bill, and probably most of you never even heard about it, which is something that Mission has done really for 40 years. Pretty much every year in the legislature, we kill bills that would have taken away your homeschool freedoms, but we did it very quietly while you were asleep. So most of the time you didn't even know about it. In fact, it kind of has backfired on us because there's a kind of a relevancy issue that unfortunately has been created in Michigan where people don't know who Mission is or what we do, or the fact that we've been just in the background making Michigan one of the freest states in the whole United States to homeschool. And people are like, who are you and why do we care? So we're a 100% volunteer board. We have no paid staff. We're just homeschool moms and dads, just like you, in the state of Michigan, who care about our children. And we want to give them the best possible upbringing and education that we can. So Stephanie Chang says that her colleagues are much more open to a regulatory bill now than they were in 2015. So this is what her bill said in 2015. So I'm just reading this to you, not to say that this is the bill that will be introduced, but it's possible that something like this could get reintroduced. Because again, the Washington Post told me very directly that she wants this bill passed. And so she's still very interested in her bill as it was written. This is a press release she put out in 2015. The bill would require that a parent wanting to homeschool their child or children provide the names and ages and the name and address of the parent, guardian, or other person in a parental relation to the child or children to the superintendent of the school district in which they reside. Let me jump in here and say parenthetically, the new thing, which I'll explain in a minute, is that you would not probably be reporting to just your local school board. That data would be going to a centralized education database in Lansing that would be controlled by the State Department of Education. So that data does not merely stay with your local public school. They actually want a registry of every single child in Michigan in a centralized education database, not just homeschoolers, every child. So this would be a modification that would have to be made to accommodate this. It wouldn't just stay with the local public school. Let me jump back into the quote. In addition, the bill requires at least twice a year the homeschooled children are seen by a person from the following list: a physician, licensed social workers, physician's assistant, friend of the court official, school counselor or teacher, audiologist, psychologist, law enforcement officer, marriage and family therapist, member of the clergy, or regulated child care provider. So twice a year, you are having to have your child meet with some kind of a government-mandated reporter. That's the bill that we killed in 2015 that you've probably never even heard about. It's very possible that this could be reintroduced. So this is a letter, January 10th of 2024, from Dr. Michael Rice, from the Department of Education, the state school board, to the legislature. This is just one page, but there were 10 initiatives that he said he wants to get passed in 2024. One of them was he wants every single child in Michigan in a centralized education database controlled by the DEA, the DOE, sorry. And that this would apply to children in what he calls 4 buckets: public school, private school, parochial school, and homeschool. So you have to have a child assigned to one of those 4 buckets, and then those children will all be in one centralized education database, and Catherine is going to talk about that probably here in just a minute when I finish, about some of the concerns of having your child in a centralized education database. But the Detroit News, really just a little over a week ago, February 19, I'm sorry, that says 2023, of 2024. Senator Dana Polhanke is the Senate Education Chair, and she said to the Detroit News that someone is already introducing a bill, a homeschool regulation bill. She says, I can't say who. So we have reason to believe that a bill has been written on the Senate side and is waiting for presentation to the Senate Education Committee. We have not had a chance to see that bill yet, but she has, or at least she knows who wrote it, and she will not say who that is. But there apparently is a bill, most likely on the Senate side, and then we just had confirmed 2 days ago that there absolutely 100% is a draft of a House bill. Eyes have been laid on it, it has been seen, the draft has been written. And so obviously with a draft, they can continue to modify it, and so to put out a release of this is what's in it is irresponsible, because it can still change as more people input, and they can change the wording of it. But it would at least require a registration of all homeschoolers in the state, and that those names would have to go to a centralized database at the State Department of Education. That's a minimum of what it would require, and it could require more than that by the time it actually reaches an education committee. So people keep saying, well, what's the House bill? And, I've looked it up, I can't find it. Well, it has not yet been introduced to committee, so it's not been assigned a House bill number yet. But as soon as it gets introduced, then it will have a number. My personal take on it is that they want to keep it really close and not let anybody know the exact wording of what is going to be in it until they're ready to try to pass it, and then they're going to just pass it as fast as they can with very little opportunity for anybody to respond to it. That's why we at Mission have kept saying, we want you to contact your legislators now, ahead of time, and just, if nothing else, just say, we know that there are proposals being made that homeschooling needs to be regulated in some way, and we oppose any and all additional regulations to the homeschooling law. The law that we have is working great. There's nothing broken about it. We don't need to fix it. And so please oppose any additional regulations to the homeschooling law. So I want to now introduce our friend Catherine Boussard, who is with Salt and Light Global. They are an international organization that does advocacy dealing with constitutional rights, and they work around the world, around the United States, but they're located in Lansing, Michigan. And so they have a real heart for what happens here in our state as well. Great advocates for parental rights and homeschooling. So I'm going to turn this over to her and let her share.
It's great to be with you you all today. And as I'm getting started here, I am leading my next colleague. She's going to share a clipboard. If you're finding this information valuable today and you'd like to stay up to date, all of our organizations will share this kind of one sign-up sheet today. We send out alerts once, maybe twice a month if there's something like this happening that you need to know about. So it's not all the time, but if you would like to stay informed, please go ahead and share your contact with us. We'd love to stay in touch and keep you informed. What we're doing here today, it's not just about coming to an informational meeting and being in the know about what's happening in Lansing or anything like that, right? There's a whole lot more at stake, and we want to equip you guys so that you can be a part of turning the tide on this important conversation and actually protecting these liberties that we value so much. So again, we'd love to stay in touch and share that type of information. As Israel said, my name's Catherine Bissard with Salt and Light Global, and we do work around the world. My colleagues this morning are working on a comment with the United Nations. They're working with the Biden administration to come to America and talk about why we need mandatory public education, K-12, maybe pre-K through 12, for all students in a more inclusive environment, free from what they call, what they would call discriminatory ideas, like what we find in the scriptures. And so the UN Special Reporter is preparing to tour America with the Biden administration for about a month and a half, and we're submitting comments today defending parental rights, parental liberties, and especially education choice, because it really does matter. And they're doing this in America and around the world, and it is important that we stand up and stand together. I want to step back though for a moment. I know there's a lot of reasons people homeschool, and all of you have your own reason of why you started this journey. Maybe it was the failure of the public schools academically, and you're like, you know what, my kids are not getting the education that I want them to get to prepare them for life. Maybe it was safety concerns or bullying or something like that led you to homeschool. And I've had the privilege of meeting with the Wayne County Homeschool Academy before. Many of you I know homeschool because of your faith, right? You believe that this is something that God has called you to. And we see this idea that parents are the primary drivers in their child's education, upbringing, and all these things, going back to ancient times. Even secular societies, the Sumerians, for world history scholars, one of the first groups that we could find, have record of parental rights being a part of their society. But a little more recent than that, we can find in the Old Testament, if you start in Deuteronomy 6, the Lord said that he wanted parents to teach their children to love him with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love his law and obey his teachings in the morning when they got up, and at night when they went to bed, and also when they walked in the path, and when they were in their homes, at all times, to be investing in their child's knowledge. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can do that, and it could be through homeschooling, it could be through private school. There are good, godly parents raising their children whose kids are in public school. But however God has called you to parent your children, we have to recognize that is a calling from God, that parents are the ones who parent and direct and control the upbringing of their children. That was not a commandment given to the government, right? That commandment was not given to the state. Similarly, in Proverbs 22:19, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. That was not a commandment given to the state of Michigan, nor to the United States government, nor to the United Nations, or any other government in the world. That commandment was given to parents. Why? Because God places children in the families that he knows can equip them for the work that he's calling them to do. And that is a sacred part of our faith, honestly, in an act of obedience to God, that parents would raise and mentor their children and disciple them to know the living God. And if you're a secular homeschooler and you're here today, we're glad you're here, but I do not want to miss this point. Parental rights are well protected in our Constitution, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But, and I will say the 14th Amendment protects equal protection under the law for everyone, regardless of your religious affiliation or any other attribute of who you are. That has traditionally been where the Supreme Court has looked when they've ruled on parental rights and issues like this. They've used the 14th Amendment. But if you homeschool because you say, this is what God is calling my family to, this is obedience to the Word of God, that becomes something protected by the First Amendment as well, by our religious liberty protections. And that's something that, again, is pretty ironclad. And it's very important that we understand that religious liberty is a natural fundamental right as well, and it is also a civil right. It is important that we start protecting our civil rights as well. And I do want to just say this is very well protected again, as we said. Our own Michigan law, we have a really amazing statute, MCL 380.10, the pioneering generation that really fought to legalize homeschooling in Michigan. They didn't stop at that. They worked with the Michigan legislature and they passed this statute in the 90s, and it says this, that it is the natural fundamental right of parents to determine and direct the care, teaching, and education of their children. They also worked with the Michigan legislature and they passed MCL 380.15 or 380.1561 and Section F. And that's part of the Michigan Public School Code that creates an exemption and carve out for homeschoolers, and it regulates all the subjects that you have to teach. Math and reading and spelling and grammar and history and several others, and you have to have a set curriculum. And it has a standard. Again, it's the best homeschool law in the nation, the most free homeschool law in the nation, but it's also been the most successful. And that's something that we want to protect. At the US Supreme Court level, I just want to read one quote. Parental rights have come before the Supreme Court hundreds of times in the history of our country. And a case from 1925 that really was a landmark case in defending parental rights and the right of parents to direct and educate their children as they see fit was, in this case, Pierce versus the Society of Sisters. And they said the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture them and direct their destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare that child for additional obligations. And again, they said specifically, it is not the state, not the government, it is the parent that has that duty and responsibility. You can find this information and more on a little card at the back table, Parental Rights Words That Work, if you want to read more about this. But your rights to educate your children, for whatever reason, whatever motive you have, are well protected by the United States Constitution, by Michigan law, and the Michigan Constitution. But recently there's been this shift. And it's been a shift saying that, no, it's not actually the parent's job, it's the state's job. States need to provide for the safety of children. They need to provide for their education, for their care. And the Michigan Democratic Party, the party that's leading policy at the moment, we're not partisan in any way, but I just, as Israel said, when a government bureaucrat tells you they're gonna take away your freedom, you wanna pay close attention, you wanna listen. The Michigan Democrat Party had this to say. If this shows you the shift in mindset, again, from ancient world, biblical thinking, modern American law, the Michigan Democratic Party is now saying, quote, not sure where this parent should control what is taught in public schools because there are kids idea is originating. But parents do have the right to choose to send their kids to a hand-selected private school at their own expense if that's what they desire. Notice they did not mention homeschooling at all. I don't know about you, that's concerning, that they don't think that homeschooling is an appropriate alternative option. However, they go on to say, quote, the purpose of a public education in a public school is not to teach kids only what parents want them to be taught. It is to teach them what society needs them to know. The client of the public school is not the parent, but the entire community, the public. It's this idea that the state has the authority and duty to socially engineer your child into the citizen the state wants them to be. That is not consistent with Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, as the Supreme Court ruled. It's not consistent with the best legal traditions, and it's certainly not consistent with your best interest for your child. You know your child better than anyone else. You have their best interest at heart. No one else should be able to intervene and tell you that that's not your right, that's not your role. And it's very important that we recognize the moment that we're in. You know, when I was growing up, my parents were threatened with prison because they chose to homeschool. Israel's parents had all kinds of multiple court dealings because they were choosing to homeschool. There was a price that those that came before us paid for the freedom that we stand in today. And we've been really blessed, and we've gotten really comfortable because homeschooling is extremely accessible in Michigan. We are the freest state with the best laws in the nation. That's something we want to protect. But there's a price in this generation to pay, in this moment, to preserve that freedom, not just for your children, but for your children's children and the generations to come. And it means that we have to be willing to sacrifice. It means that we have to give things like our time and invest. It means that we need to give things, maybe it's your sacred honor. Maybe you stand up and you speak out and people say, oh, they're crazy. You know what? That's okay. If I'm standing up for what God has called me to, I'll take those hits all day long because I'm confident in where I stand. But we need to be willing, like the founders, to give our time, our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor for the cause that we're in today. Because if we lose freedom, getting it back is a whole lot harder. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 6 says, guard what has been entrusted to you. And I really believe that's the call for all of us today, is to guard the freedom that we stand in right now for ourselves and for those that come, to preserve this right, to disciple our children, to give them the best opportunities that we can. And so with that, again, we want you to be more than just informed, more than just inspired. We want you to be equipped with some practical things that you can do. And so there's 3 practical things we want to invite you to do. Number 1 is to pray. And Eileen will share more on some of these, but number 1, to pray. When this battle was won in Michigan about 40 years ago, it wasn't because we had the best attorneys, the legislature on our side, or anything like that. We did have some good attorneys. They argued before the Michigan Supreme Court. Our friend Dave Kallman was really a champion for this. He did his best job, and he knew he lost. And the judges voted, and they issued their decision on a Friday like this, and they knew they lost. And so they told the homeschool community, you've got to pray. And that weekend, many people prayed and fasted. And over the course of that weekend, that judge, one of the 4 Democratic judges that had voted against homeschool freedom, his heart was changed. And it was Justice Bernstein, and he said, you know, I don't know why, but I know I voted wrong. He went into the clerk Monday morning. He said, you haven't published that decision yet, right? You haven't published this case. I need to change my vote. Can I write a separate dissent and get it to you so that on Tuesday, when you publish all of our rulings from last week, I will have voted correctly? So over the weekend, after he had already voted, God moved his heart through prayer to come in and change his vote. And that's why we have these landmark cases and these incredible freedoms here, because people prayed. Prayer will work today too, because we have the same God that we're praying to. So I encourage you to begin to pray. We know there's a bill. We know that the window, the time that we have to make a difference is closing. Pray, invite your children to pray, get your churches praying. Prayer does change things. It's not just talking to the air. Second, I want to say that we want to speak and use our voice. It's really important that we do that and that we do that strategically. And to that end, we have a lot of handouts. I'm going to cover them briefly, and Eileen's going to share a little bit more. But if you grab nothing else today, we have 2 handouts at the back table with these kind of blue and green bars on top. These talk about protecting private school and homeschool education. We know that Dr. Rice's letter is going after both private schools and homeschools, and so we want to make sure we protect all of that. We have a lot of research and statistics here, and there's some key things that we want to do as we engage, as you use your voice, as you communicate with your legislators, and advocate for your family, and again, for freedom for all students across Michigan. Education choice is a good thing for everyone, and we want to showcase success. We want to showcase those high test scores, those children who are such strong, dynamic, persuasive ambassadors for homeschooling. When you meet a homeschooler, and you're like, wow, that kid is really smart. Wow, they're so fluent in conversation, they can talk to anybody. You know, you meet homeschoolers, they change your mind really quickly, right? Let your legislators meet them. Take your kids to a coffee hour, or ask your children to write a paragraph. What do you love about homeschooling? If they're really young, maybe have them draw a picture. But showcase the really positive results that homeschooling or that Christian education is producing. Second is we want to set the record straight. Because as Israel mentioned, there are a host of lies out there that are being spread, and just truly false narratives. They're saying that because of safety, we have to intervene. Well, the truth is that homeschoolers, according to studies we've documented, footnoted in these resources for you, homeschoolers are 257% safer than their public school peers. Is that a pretty phenomenal statistic? 257%. Private school students are 80% safer than private schoolers are 80% safer than their public schools peers. So no matter what arena you're in, public schools are by far the most dangerous education choice you can choose. There's another study from Psychology Today, I think it was May of last year, where they said that 11.7% of children in a public school, by the time they graduate, will experience sexual abuse, misconduct at the hands of a public school staff member. Not to mention what other kids might do to them, that's at the hands of the staff of the public schools. And we need to make sure there are ways to protect our children from that, from gang violence, from bullying, from all the other ill effects that are happening, and honestly, that public schools are simply not equipped to combat. We know we have a lot of good teachers in public schools and a lot of good, caring people there, but they don't have the resources to face the problems that they're being tasked with. And so, again, the safest thing statistically is private education. Maybe we need to help our legislators refocus their attention on the real problem and find solutions. What can they do to fix that? We also know that there is, on the abuse side of the story, there is a 0% correlation, 0 is an easy number to remember, 0% correlation between choosing private education, homeschooling, and having children be abused. 0% correlation, studied over decades. These are studies that we can cite, that we can inform our legislators of, because many of them just don't know. And again, the story that CPS painted of these couple of families was really bad. But the truth is coming out, and it's turning out that those reports were falsified. They had misinformation in them, and the charges are looking more and more ridiculous by the day as evidence emerges. We need to stand firm on the truth and make sure our lawmakers know the truth as well. There's a lot more stats. I won't go through all of them, but again, we really encourage you to grab these resources, and we encourage you to also, as you talk with your legislatures, give them positive things that they can correct. Encourage them to go and speak and look at public schools as something that needs their attention. It's not homeschooling, we're doing fine, but we need to fix their attention. And I also want to speak about this idea of it's just registration for a moment. People say it's just registration, it's just a name on a list. And as Israel mentioned, that's not going to fix any problem. Where there are problems, having your child's name on a list is not going to help, because your child's name is already on a list. They have a birth certificate, they have a social security number. These children are not missing. Another stat in our research is that between 31 and 68% of public school students have truancy issues. They are the missing children, it's not the homeschool community. But anyhow, I digress. This registration idea, why is registration so dangerous? There is a program that public schools across the state are using called My Data Hub, and it tracks something called a UIC, a unique identification code for students. And this UIC tracks more than just a student's name and what school they go to, their birthday, and their grade. It tracks their test scores, it tracks their class grades, it tracks things like their medical history, their vaccination status, how much money your family makes, what your social, political, religious views might be, and all kinds of things. As students take tests or answer surveys, it tracks data on that as well. And some of this data is even things like their facial expressions while they're doing a test or learning. It's frightening the amount of data that they're tracking. And we've linked to this again in those documents. You can go on the website and watch the video about all the data they're collecting. Now, ostensibly this is well-intentioned, so that if you choose to move from this school district to this school district, your records follow you. And it just makes transferring schools really easy. But there's a lot of other data, again, that seems to go along with this social engineering, creating the product the community wants idea as well. And that's a frightful thought. And this is the registration system that every public school student is using in the state of Michigan. It's a free program, and public schools are required to participate. And the participation rate is more than 96% of districts across the state of Michigan are using this UIC system. This is their registration system. When they talk about registering homeschoolers, do you think that they're going to want more than just your name and address, or maybe a phone number? They're going to want, most likely, parallel levels of information to follow them. If you're a private school, currently you give them a head count, and you give them this is how many of those heads are in this grade count, and that's it. I think from private schools, they're going to want, again, a parallel system of information so that they have all of this data on your student, and it's an annual renewal of that registration. That is concerning. And so anyhow, registration, it is much more harmful than we think. We also heard from Israel, registration is really only the first step. And there's a lot of good reasons to think that as well. So we have a lot of things to fight for here. Oh, yes, thank you. Social credit score. So with that registration information, they are using that for more, I don't want to be too long-winded, but they're using that for more than just to make transferring schools easy. They are establishing something called a social credit score. And you can research this online. Israel and Alex Newman, I always forget his name, Israel and Alex Newman did a really great podcast. You can find it on the top of the Salt and Lake Global Facebook page right now. You can also find it on YouTube. But so the social credit score will be used as your student phases out of that K-12 education system into college. Well, what academic opportunities are they really best suited for? I mean, their family only makes this much money, or they have these social political views, and their test scores are like this. Maybe they're not really cut out for their dream career. We need to, send them in this direction instead. It may very well be used down the line. It's being used in China and other countries to do this right now. And again, we have a federal administration working on global standards for these things. We know this is the direction that things are heading. But talking about, well, this is whether, this is really a standard of whether or not this child even gets to go to college. Can they study to become a doctor? Can they study to become a lawyer? Well, we really don't need more lawyers, who have a biblical worldview. We don't need doctors who think that a patient's choice really matters and that they should be able to let their religious views shape their health care. We don't think that that's important. You can see where this would go. And so tracking this data really does have a long-term, lifelong, generational consequence. And we need to not be naive that this is the direction that things are taking. And boy, I'm going to wrap up here just with the thought that we really do, again, have a lot of reasons to be very concerned about what's happening. This is, I don't want to use the word slippery slope, this is an incremental, intentional plan to change education and to take away those parental rights. Again, these are fundamental civil rights. For many of us, these are religious rights. So many other things that we want to protect. The battle has got to be fought. We need all of you to do it, to pray, to use your voice, to build relationships with your legislators, and do what we can right now to preserve these fundamental freedoms. And this is truly a giant that we're facing, but we are serving still the God of David and Goliath. We have no reason to fear when we stand before that giant because we know, again, that we're standing as God calls us to. So be bold, be courageous, and stand with boldness. And I want to invite you to now hear from a friend of mine and another friend who will give you even more really practical strategies of how you can stand with boldness, how you can get out there in the marketplace of ideas. Eileen is the president of Citizens for Traditional Values. They've been around since the 1980s, fighting this fight, again, for more than a generation, leading in many ways, working with the Michigan legislature to improve our cause and freedoms, and so I'm going to hand it off to her now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for coming this afternoon and taking the time to get the information that you need and that you can share with your friends, neighbors, the people who sit next to you in the pews of the different churches you might go to. Citizens for Traditional Values has been around since the late 80s. My predecessor, James Muffett, actually was a homeschool parent who did help to fight for the homeschool law that we have now. His children, they had to make sure they weren't outside during the daytime hours because a truant officer would be called. So thankfully, that is not the case today. We want to preserve that freedom. And as Katie said, we can't take it for granted anymore. And what we exist for is to really be a voice, positive voice for your values, both in the state legislature and in these kind of groups, in the community, based upon our guiding principles that really America has a beautiful and incredible foundation that is a Judeo-Christian foundation. that respects life, that respects educational freedom, that sees the family as one of our basic foundational units of government, of sort, a family, that America was built upon. And we believe in a traditional, really a free enterprise philosophy of government, that government shouldn't be overtaxing and overburdening its citizens. So when we look at legislation that comes before the different legislators, we try and share that information with you. You are hardworking, you're raising your kids, and we understand you can't be in every committee. You can't be watching all this stuff, nor should you have to. I would like to see less legislation being passed, frankly. This past year was not a banner year for people who have a socially conservative faith background. Let me just say it that way. If you take a look on the table back there, and you probably picked this up, elections have consequences. Our current majority in the legislature right now have passed numerous laws that have to do, well, you all know that constitutional amendment to preserve abortion in our Constitution was passed, but there were lots of laws that passed in the legislature that then buttressed that law. I don't know if you know that. But now women are not protected in abortion clinics if they do go. All of those regulations that used to guide those clinics have been removed. And that's not good for the women of Michigan. Also, there are bills right now in the state Senate that are waiting to get committee hearings on physician-assisted suicide. Anyone here remember Jack Kevorkian? Maybe not, maybe I'm just old, but we fought this battle once before. We believe in the dignity of life from conception through natural death. These laws are insidious. We will fight them, but we need everybody to be aware that this is going on, and we may need you to make calls or maybe even come to some of those committees. There's also, I think everyone knows now that in our civil rights law, sex, the term sex, was expanded to include sexual orientation and gender identity. That has many long-term significant impacts, especially on the community of faith, let me just say. And I mean, there's so many. I want you to look at this, because this is my call to you is that we need you to engage. We know that you are busy, but we are going to give you the tools, and it also, you'll see a page that says communicating with your legislators. It's very simple. We even gave you a QR code saying, who is my legislator here? And it pulls it right up. You just punch in your address, and it pulls your legislator up. And we might need you to, on these homeschool bills, to do a quick note, a personal email to your legislator. Let me just tell you, if 50 of those come into a legislator's office, I used to work in the state senate, and I also worked for a US senator, and I got those calls. And believe me, when we started getting calls on issues, our legislator, our boss knew that, and they wanted to know what are people saying, what are they doing, and this is an election year. The House of Representatives is a two vote majority. It's not like a landslide last 2 years ago. So everyone's paying attention, and your voice will matter even more this year. So I want to encourage you, and I'm not making it burdensome. When Katie said, hey, make sure you if nothing else, take this home. This has some fast little bullets you can talk about why you're opposed to creating and changing our current really good homeschool law. We want to make it as simple as possible. So email, come to the committees. We were up north, and we had a wonderful idea from a homeschool family who have teenagers who, some of the teenage groups in homeschool co-ops have debate clubs. And he said, why don't you have some teenagers come? And I said, yeah, I would love to have a couple teenagers come and share who they are, what they do, and why they'd be opposed to this law. I would love to have that happen. So, you know, I know that's clipboards going around. If you think that you would be willing to do that one day, we won't have a lot of notice. You might get a call the night before and say, can you come? We hope you do, because I want to tell you, it will have an impact. And another thing I want to draw your attention to, because we're trying to help educate everybody about, hey, how does our process work? This is kind of like my legislator Bible. This book out on the table, Citizen's Guide to Good Government, or Citizen's Guide to State Government, I should say. I want it to be good government. It has the names, addresses, the locations of districts, pictures of your legislator, what committees they serve on, how the committee process works. And heck, as homeschoolers, this is a great primer to teach, like, what is civics, what is government. This is an excellent resource. All your legislators have these books, so you can ask them for them. They'll send it to you, even if you call them. But I brought some today. And then I think I want to let you know too, as CTV is we're most of what we do is educational, but we also have a what's called a C4 and a PAC. So in election years, we can do candidate questionnaires, and then we, based on the answers to those questionnaires, we do endorsements based upon our guiding principles, so that those who are in who have our values, protecting life, family, our Judeo-Christian heritage, a limited form of government that's not onerous and burdensome. We ask those kinds of questions to legislators and ask the candidates to respond. We ask everybody, Democrat, Republican, everybody, and then we take the answers back, and we have a board, and they review them, and we do endorsements based on that. And then we ask, we put them in a voter guide that's the size of a church bulletin. And we will ask pastors to take these voter guides. They're comparative. You know, they're not telling you who to vote for. They're comparative, and they're sharing answers and who each candidate is endorsed by. So therefore, they are completely legal. And we want you to encourage your pastor. I don't think I have it here, but I have a do's and don'ts for churches, because we want to be absolutely legal in everything we do, and we want to encourage you to talk to your pastors and say, hey, can we do a once a month issue group, because there's so many things happening that affect us every day. Legislators are making laws that affect 10 million people, and there's been a lot of them last year especially, and you know, we have to be diligent, we have to be aware. So I really would encourage you to start talking to your pastor about, hey, can we do voter registration? You can do a voter registration at your church. I think Sean will talk to you about that. He's with Americans for Prosperity. There's lots of things you can do, both with your friend groups, your neighbor groups, and with your churches. And you know, the difference will be if another 5% of the faith community goes out to vote this year, a huge sea change can happen. And it will be to represent your values. Because there's no such thing as a vacuum. I think you guys all know that. And so if you're not participating, then, you know, we get what we deserve. So I just want to encourage you to engage. Make sure when you see our alerts come out, that you respond. And I appreciate all you're doing. You're doing the important things, and you are educating your children. And you've got to also realize you have a role as a responsible Christian citizen also. And that's what we are encouraging and thank you for. I'm going to hand it off now to Sean. Sean is with Americans for Prosperity. I love the name.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. You guys hear me okay? All right, well, yes, as Eileen said, my name is Sean Bertolino. I'm a Community Engagement Director with Americans for Prosperity. And I guess just at the outset, I want to let you guys know, my organization is a secular organization. And beyond that, my wife and I actually send our kids to public schools. So I know this is very, very negative stuff here. But we're here. Why am I here? So our organization, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We are very much a conservative libertarian organization. We do believe in basic American rights laid out in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. So what does that have to do with this? Well, as been mentioned several times before, parental rights in Michigan are under attack right now. Now, we are not of the opinion that any particular education system for our kids is best, but we are of the opinion that every education system is best if that's the decision you and your family want to do. And so, we have these attacks that are going on here, as Israel and Katie clearly laid out, that are kind of based on false pretenses. It's amusing to me that my children go to public school, and so they are the most tracked, monitored individuals in the world, and yet, as we know, bad things happen to public school students all the time. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that, well, homeschool communities certainly, there's some really bad stuff going on, and the point's well taken. It's like, I don't understand where this logic is, except that I do. So I've been in politics for only about 2 years. My professional background is financial advisor. Let me tell you something. Things that go on in Lansing, they're kind of as bad as you think they are. I'm a little bit more blunt. These guys are outstanding, but I get to speak a little bit more freely. I don't want to sit there and say that people are sitting there twirling their mustaches. That's not the case. Maybe, but it's the idea that these individuals are motivated by very few things, and the big motivation is power. The big motivation is, hey, how can we make a difference to make sure we get reelected, or what's with the current trend going on in DC, or what's sexy right now, what's cool, what's trendy. There's two really big things that people fear, that is elected officials. It's money. Money that they have, or money that their opponents have. And the other big thing is their constituencies. You, us. You get an individual, right or left, we're not partisan, right or left, you get a constituency angry at them, and they will change their attitude real fast. But what does that mean? That means you guys actually have to get angry at them, or let them know that, hey, this isn't right. AFP, we are the nation's premier grassroots organization. So that means that we are the biggest, beefiest individuals in the country who specialize in grassroots activities. I'm with our state chapter, obviously, here in Michigan. So kind of very similar to what Eileen was talking about, we go out there and we send everyday men and women from all different backgrounds to do various things called grassroots outreach. What that is, that's calling legislators, that is calling neighbors, that is knocking on doors, that is going to events, that is making cookies, if that makes sense. Whatever it is a collection of individuals who are going out there preaching a common cause and say, hey, we're watching, we're listening, we don't like what we see, or maybe you do like what you see and you might give them an encouragement. Maybe there's a good legislator out there somewhere who's actually good and they're passing good legislation. You want to say thank you. That stuff goes a long way too, by the way. So if you know someone, particularly at the local level, tell them thank you. But a lot of people will say, well, I don't have a lot of time, or I'm just too busy, or oh, well, my vote doesn't count, and they're not going to listen to me. Well, if everybody thinks that way, yeah, absolutely, they're just going to keep on doing what they're doing. Now, the cool thing about you guys is that you're already here. So I know that you have busy lives. My in-laws homeschool. We have good friends from our church that homeschool. I know your guys' lives are busy. I'm not naive to that. All right, but you're here, and so you're taking time out of your day with your families, work, job, or whatever the situation might be, to come here and listen to us talk about all the awful things happening in Lansing. So now the next step is, what are we going to do about that? Because I'll tell you something, even though I've been professionally in this political world for about 2 years or so, I've been involved in politics for about a dozen years or so since my son was born, our first child. You kind of get up one day and you're like, man, this world's interesting, let's go do something about it. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where everybody gets all fired up and like, yeah, rabble, let's go and do something, and then everybody goes home. And they don't do anything after that. It is one thing to rabble. That's really good. Rabble is important. You gotta get the juices flowing and let's go. But then there's the next step. Okay, what are you gonna do about it? And that's what our organization represents. We want to get involved. We want to let these guys and girls up in Lansing know that, hey, what you're doing is not good, and we're going to make a statement either now or later. It was very well articulated. Elections have consequences, guys. You know, it's the idea that, you know, you can sit there and say your vote doesn't matter, or my voice doesn't count, or what difference does it make? And like I said earlier, well, if everybody thinks that way, then the wrong people get elected. And now here we are. And that's not, you know, I'm not blaming you, I'm not blaming the church, I'm not blaming any particular organization, but we see it, right? We live there all the time, like, get out of here. You know, I've learned so much about the homeschooling community over the past year. I know that, you know, the forefathers of the 80s and the 90s, you know, your parents who were on the front lines, they paid a heavy price. You know, I had no idea, my family didn't do any of that stuff. And then this next generation is like, oh, well, isn't that nice? There's too often that people generally rest on their laurels. It's like, well, you know, that'll never happen. Well, you know, Michigan's one of the freest states in the country. Well, you know, well, people in Lansing right now understand that too. They're not stupid. By the way, just as a sidebar, never underestimate what, you know, the other side does. There's no one stupid in this game. You know, their ideas might be not good, but no one's dumb. People are thinking about these things, and they think that, hey, you know, right now, homeschooling community in Michigan, it is pretty loose. It's one of the top 3 states, I believe, Israel. Okay, one of the top 3 states in the country. Well, certainly they wouldn't mind just a little bit of legislation, just a little bit more regulation, and you know, no big deal. You know, okay, well, that's the first step. That is what happens. Don't be fooled. Don't think that's like, well, you know, like the bill that was proposed by Senator Chang 8 years ago. It's like, well, you just want your name and number, you know where you live. You know, this is easy stuff. No big deal. You know. And then what? You know, Michigan's a full-time legislature. One of the few states in the country that have a full-time legislature. These men and women in Lansing are there every month. Of every week, I don't know. They have some sort of basis around the school schedule. The point is that they need something to do. You know, other states, some states actually only meet a couple of weeks. And then they go home and they, you know, actually, you know, talk to their people. Michigan? Nah. They're down in Lansing most of the year. So they need something to do. So yeah, go ahead, do a little bit of registration. Well, then what's gonna happen next year? A little bit more. It's just a little, guys. Don't worry about it. It's just a little. And you know, I don't know what your position, and by the way, I don't want to sidebar too much here, but I don't know what your position of what, you know, happened during the pandemic. You know, that affected everybody in a lot of different ways. But just from a completely apolitical point of view, we saw how incrementalism works. Okay, well, you know, we're just going to do this for a little bit. We're just going to do this for a little bit longer. Well, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that as well. Well, you know, you do this, that, and then maybe we can do this. You know, I mean, like, and this is left, right. You know, your apathetic voter, they're like, holy gosh, what's going on here? You know, everybody got mad. You know, Michigan was one of the worst. But it's like, we use it as a foil to show that people in power, even if they're the most well-meaning individuals in the world, well, you know, just a little bit. Well, just a little bit more. Okay, well, I mean, good Lord, we're all parents. We know how this works. You know, give our kids a little bit of time for something. It's like, well, just 5 more minutes. You know, this is, you know, we're not done. All right. So AFP, we want to go out there and we want to show these individuals, hey, this is not going to work anymore. You know, we know what you're doing. We know how this game has worked, and we know what to do now too. We want to hold you accountable so that good legislation is passed and bad legislation is not passed. It's killed, to use that word. I know it's hard. It takes time. It takes time out of your day. But we try to make it fun. You know, the more people that do the same thing, the more fun it can be. You know, we have phone banks. We have a lot of people there bringing all kinds of food. People can like watch something in the background, have a game on, you know, whatever. You go on door days. You can have like competitions, give us some prizes, you know, whatever. Whatever makes it enjoyable the most, that's what we kind of specialize in. We are a very much well-funded organization, and so we've got all kinds of cool stuff. You know, we got all kinds of swag, as we call it, you know, all kinds of goodie bags, things that make you feel good and involved. But that's what our advantage is. And so we take this stuff seriously, and so we're very proud to partner with these guys because they do really, really good work. And they've been doing it for a long, long time. You know, and so now when it comes to the idea of parental rights or anything else that runs afoul of our principles, which are typically, prototypical American principles, oh yeah, we're gonna have some fun with that. And so, you know, we know there's a community out there, we know there's a community right here, that you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, but beyond that, if you're not woken up yet, make sure to wake up. Because by the way, this stuff up here, this doesn't go away. I mean, that bill was 8 years ago, 2015, something like that. Oh yeah, let's bring that back out of the grave. This is how this stuff works, you guys. It doesn't just come out of left field somewhere. This is methodical, pragmatical, incremental. Again, these people are not dumb. Never, ever, ever, ever think these people are dumb, right or left. Never, ever do that. Everything has a reason, everything has a purpose. And the biggest reason too, by the way, what I said about money, it's all true. Yeah, what was it per pupil? What was it,
$14,300
yeah.
per student.
And yeah, so you multiply that out. You think they want anybody, forget I mean, like homeschooling is one thing. You think they want people in private schools, or parochial schools, charter schools? Absolutely not. You know, this is what these people think about. Why? Well, because you can get elected from that, pack your wallet, you help each other out, this is how it works. I'm not saying anything provocative, guys. Most people just don't know this. So it is a little bit incestuous, a little bit disingenuous, but nonetheless it's real. And then the whole thing with the Washington Post, and then the news, and then the statements, like you notice how it's just kind of like, oh wow, that happened. Oh geez, and that happened too. Oh my gosh, what a coincidence. Yeah, what a coincidence. So we got to get up, we got to get active, because this stuff will be here in perpetuity until it's put down, and then when it is put down, you still need to stand guard. You know, the homeschool has been around for 30-some years in Michigan, and here we are. You know, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. I don't know if that's the exact quote, and I actually know who exactly said it, but that is very real. So I've got some information back there. I know that list was going around. So, you know, we're going to be answering some questions now, I understand. Yeah, so, but thank you guys so much for your time. But now's the time to do something. Don't have another, you know, election year go by where, oh man, I should have done that. You know what, I wish I would have done this. You know what, if only I'm going to talk to one more person. Elections have consequences, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to just make one comment about what Sean said about incrementalism. I was looking through some documents related to our state constitution just this last week, and I noticed that when the State Board of Education was founded in 1908 here in the state of Michigan, that they put a provision in its founding that said that this organization is only to last 1 year, and at the end of 1 year, we're going to dismantle it and not have it anymore. We still have it. And so it was just really ironic when I saw that to see, well, that's so typical of government, isn't it? And they apparently knew it would be a bad thing, and that they didn't want it long term, but they wanted to do it for some reason initially, and they put this can only be 1 year, and then we'll shut the whole thing down. Well, it didn't happen. Is there a way I could get the PowerPoint back up on the screen? There was a couple of slides that I forgot to show you. If I can get you guys to take out your cell phones. So some of you signed up on the clipboard, but this is for Mission's Action Alert email. And so we may have news that comes out tomorrow, you know, well not tomorrow, but Monday. We don't know, but we want to make sure that you get the action alerts from our state association. Also want to remind you that we have an annual state homeschool convention that happens every year in Lansing. This year it's going to be May 9 through 11. And you can find that information on our website, homeschoolmichigan.org. It's probably the easiest URL. It's michn.org or homeschoolmichigan.org. You can register right now. Registration is open. We have some of the top homeschool speakers in the country. We have some of the top homeschool curriculum vendors that you can purchase materials. We have lots of activities for teenagers, for children. It's a great opportunity. It's the largest homeschool gathering in the state, and it's annual. We've been doing it for 40 years. So we'd love to see you there. If you're not used to coming, we want to invite you to that. We also have other events throughout the year. We just had our annual Ladies' Night Out, which was an overnight in Lansing. We had a dinner and an overnight with great speakers and lots of fun. We also have a legislative Capitol Day that we are doing in October now, and so you can actually have an appointment made to meet with your legislator. We will give you a homeschool information packet that you can take directly to your representative or senator and give them a packet that has information about the homeschool laws. And so you can meet them and let them see that homeschoolers are friendly and kind. And we would encourage you to get on the email list. So if you go to homeschoolmichigan.org, there's lots of information there about the law, how to get started, all kinds of great information on the website. And one more thing to scan. This is a different QR code, so if you know how to use your camera app and scan this. This is just like a free information bag online. So we've got a bunch of articles that have been published on this issue in some of the major publications here in Michigan, as well as some responses to that. We have some video clips from the state school board and some other things. So this is just a link to a Google Drive. You don't have to put an email in or anything to get this. It's just free information that you can download. So we do want to go to questions and answers. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and hopefully we can hear you. We will endeavor to answer your personal question. So,
do you want to take one of the mics and just pass it on? Do you need us to?
We can't do that. Do you want to pass this around? Sure.
While you're thinking of questions, if I can clarify one thing, Sean brought up the money and the point that each student is worth about $14,000 to a local public school. That's an annual figure per year. That's what a local district approximately collects for each student. For homeschoolers across the state, that number means that the homeschool population at 50,000 or so students is worth more than $500 million annually to local public schools in so-called lost revenue. If you factor in the private school population, that number grows to be over $2 billion. B with a, B as in billion. $2 billion each year in revenue to local school districts. And on one hand, you might say, well, that, it's hurting the public schools, they don't have enough money or whatever. I bet most of you who homeschool do it for a lot less than $14,000 per year per child. And your kids are actually getting a better education, which is amazing. However, I was able to speak with the House Fiscal Agency last week, and they were able to confirm that, that unspent money, you're still paying your taxes, you're still paying the equivalent, the state is still collecting that $14,000 for your child. It's just not necessarily going to your local school district, but it does stay in the education fund in the budget, and that means that the legislature is able to redirect that to areas like mental health or school safety or different things like that are also really important. They can direct it where they think it's most needed within the public school system. It doesn't mean those local schools aren't necessarily realizing it, but your local schools don't often look at you that way. They feel like they're losing income each year. But any questions? Did we give you enough time there?
Well, I actually have more of a concern. So I've been a homeschooling
Hold on, let me get your
parent.
microphone.
I have been a homeschooling parent on and off since 2012. And one of my biggest concerns now is I now have my eldest daughter's in high school, and she's going to be doing dual enrollment this year, is the huge push for cooperatives. It's where the public schools will run like classes and co-op classes under the guise of homeschooling, but it's not. And my concern is they are coming to new homeschooling families and lying to us. Well, not me, but a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends, saying that it is homeschooling. We just need this information. And some of the information that I'm getting from my kids, it's very personal information that is really not the state's business. And my concern is if we don't get this sort of under control, a lot of new families are going to be very supportive of registration because they're getting the dollars from the state. What can we do, I guess, as veteran parents to get this sort of, I don't say under control, but to really educate the new families that are coming in a kind and caring way?
Mission has actually written several articles and position papers on our state organization's view on public school homeschool partnerships. So when you sign up as a homeschooler to get non-core elective classes through your public school, you are actually considered by that public school to be a part-time public school student, and they send a receipt into Lansing to get reimbursed for your child. So they can get up to as much as about $8,500 a year for your child when you participate in the partnerships. And so on one level, what a lot of the schools are concerned about is the revenue that they are not receiving by having their child there. And so if they can get you to sign up for just a couple of classes, they get significant revenue from the state for your child participating. We don't even know exactly how much money that costs taxpayers each year because there aren't clear records exactly of how many students are enrolled. There aren't clear records on exactly how many classes they're taking and what that money ultimately amounts to. But we think there's probably about 20,000 homeschool students in the state of Michigan that participate in public school partnerships. And as far back as 15 years ago, the state was spending about $50 million a year on that. It's probably more than double that now because of the exponential growth of the partnership. So our organization believes in privately funded education, and we believe that anytime the government pays for something, they control it. So if you ultimately want to have full control over your child's education, you have to pay for it. And also, it is a voluntary registration with the public school. You're voluntarily signing up and registering your child when you join the public school partnerships. There's a lot of issues with that, but please go to our MICHN website. We have a blog on there, and you can search for partnership, and you should be able to find some of those articles.
Can I add a really short line to encapsulate some of that? With government money comes government strings. And there are strings, there always will be strings. And I also want to remind families that public schools are changing radically. And currently, as we mentioned, the Elliott Larson Act has expanded. If you have a public school facility that your student is using, you don't know that someone of the opposite sex is not going into that bathroom. If they're playing sports, that someone of the opposite sex is not showering fully unclothed right next to them in that locker room or something like that. If you have a student in a variety of different situations, again, there's many safety concerns, and also just the worldview. If you're homeschooling because you feel that that's something that God has called you to, because you want your children to be discipled in the ways of the Lord, when they step foot in that public school, I assure you they are being discipled in the ways of the world, in a humanistic mindset, because that's all that they're teaching in a public school. And it doesn't matter if that's art class or sports or anything else. It's a very different worldview. And we need to understand what exactly we're compromising and what is truly and fully at stake there. But with government strength comes government responsibility.
And also, we've had a lot of homeschool organizations that have created co-ops, that have created homeschool sports leagues, and so forth. Well, as soon as those options become available from the public school, people see it as free. I mean, it's not free. It's your neighbors are paying for your child to be in the public school partnership. You're just doing it at someone else's expense. But what happens is it's had a negative impact on the number of support groups, co-ops, and I believe it will have a negative impact on the homeschool sports leagues within our state. As soon as everybody can get it from the public school, we'll see the private organizations dwindle. We have already seen it. I think we'll continue to see that, especially if public school sports becomes an option. And then basically, when all those homeschool sports leagues disappear, what's your option? Well, now your kid can only play in the public school because there aren't any homeschool sports leagues left, right? So our view is, why do we always have to run to the government for everything? Why can't we say, let's create our own homeschool performing arts. Let's create our own homeschool sports leagues. Let's create our own homeschool co-ops. We can do it better. We have. And our view is we just believe that the private sector does it better. And so we left the public school because they're inefficient in what they do. They're ineffective in promoting the right kinds of values. And yet there's this tendency to keep running back to them because it's quote unquote free. So our organization, I'm speaking for Mission, MICHN, I'm speaking for our organization. I know some of the organizations on the, here that we work with would take a different viewpoint on that, so I'm not speaking for everybody on the panel, but that's the Mission's viewpoint, and we have, again, position papers on some of those issues, even the public school sports thing. I just wrote an article on our website on that as well.
Israel, because I've been part of the community for over a decade, I'm on a few committees, especially here in Wayne County. I'm through Metro City Co-op here in Downriver, Michigan. There is currently a change.org that a lot of homeschooling parents are trying to get past. The Michigan High School Athletic Organization does not allow homeschoolers to participate in athletics unless you do 60% of your classes, which basically is like 4 to 5 of your hours. And a lot of homeschoolers are very for it because they see academic scholarships, they see athletic scholarships as an opportunity. And you know, it's really hard as a veteran parent that I've been on a bunch of committees, I've really fought, I've been, you know, to the Capitol with parents to really fight for them, and for new parents to really see what's at risk, that we're going to lose as a homeschool, you know, community, especially here in Wayne County, and the things that we have fought for here, especially, you know, here in my community. I actually had a conversation with Stephanie Chang. She represents Detroit and Southern Wayne County. Her and Darren Calamari told us homeschooling parents that if we did not like it, we could move. And that was a huge thing during COVID, because at the time in Monroe County, which is a more conservative district, they were opening up their co-ops, they were opening up their gymnasiums for homeschooling families. And I said, why can't we do it here in Wayne County? Why do I have to go to Monroe County to have a gym class, to have a music class? Well, if you don't like it, just move. And that's not the attitude I want to see here in Wayne County. This is my home. This is where I'm raising my kids. And we deserve every opportunity. And we're right now we're being robbed of them. And it's not fair.
And that's where elections have consequences. So you do ultimately, you know, legislators can change, but they don't change if you don't get every single possible person up to vote. Ultimately, I mean, there's a lot of issues that, you know, and you can be, you know, I think there's a lot of viewpoints in the homeschool community, which is great. I just don't want to stray too far from when these bills come up for a vote. We all can be part of the coalition that says we do not need unnecessary registration regulation. Just remember that, even though I think people have different points of view on homeschooling, absolutely. But just remember when these bills come up, I don't want to stray too far from your actions and your ability to speak to the issue of this particular legislature that wants to regulate and register you.
I think from my perspective, one of the difficulties that we have is when we go to the legislature as homeschoolers and we say two things at the same time. We want government handouts, and oh, by the way, leave us alone. It's very confusing, and that's what the homeschool community is doing right now. We're saying we want perks, we want government money, we want access to government school sports, we want, you know, all these government programs that we want to have access to, taking classes through the public school, and oh, by the way, don't regulate us and don't tell us what to do. And the fact is, with government money comes accountability. So when the tax money is being spent on something, the legislature is responsible for the stewardship of that money. So there has to be accountability that follows that money. And so we really are, you know, kind of doing two things at the same time. Our view with Mission is that our posture would be, we just want to tell the legislature, just leave us alone. And it is difficult because we know a lot of homeschoolers really want access to basically being kind of half in the public school, half out of the public school. And we understand that, and we understand where they're coming from with it. But from our viewpoint, if you really want to be able to control the content of what you teach and to have autonomy and authority over your child's education, you kind of can't have it both ways. You can't say, we want to co-parent with the government, but we don't want you to tell us what to do. And so from our viewpoint, our position is that we just want to say, you know, you guys do what you do, we'll do what we do, and let's just respect each other in that.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, is it okay if I?
Yes, and then we'll go to this lady in the back.
Okay, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
All right, so my question is, my children actually are a part of one of the, like OVA. They get funded through OVA for elective classes nearby where we live. And I have a question. So are you saying that because we're taxpayers, like everyone else pays taxes, just because we homeschool doesn't mean that we don't fund schooling, public schools, as well, public schools. So if we opt to take part in elective classes with our tax dollars, are you saying that we are giving the state permission to regulate us? Do we lose our rights as homeschool parents to autonomy just because we're participating in something like that and saying, hey, I put in my tax dollars, can I get something out of it? I'm not asking you to teach them core, I'm not putting them in full time. Is that what you're saying?
Sometimes it takes a while, but yes, bottom line, yes. So we've already seen in Michigan where there were homeschool co-ops who used to be privately funded, who then started taking state dollars for their homeschool classes, the non-core elective classes. And then the state came in and told them, okay, you can no longer pray during class because that class time is paid for with tax dollars. And there's this separation, this wall of separation of church and state. And so, yeah, you can't have prayers during the portion of your class that's paid for with tax dollars. That's just step one. That's already happened here in Michigan. But then in other states, because we have 50 states and other states are farther ahead than we are with this kind of thing, then they can come in and say, oh, and by the way, you can't use religious materials. So, you can't use any religious materials, has to be secular. Then we've had other states who've said you can only have state-approved materials that are, that go along with the public school standards, or, you have to have certified public school teachers that administrate it, right? So it's incremental. It doesn't always happen immediately at once, but we have seen the incrementalism in other states to where the next thing is, okay, so now you're going to need to, if you're taking government school funds in any way, now you have to start teaching an LGBTQ affirming class. Like, all those things have happened in other states. So it's not far-fetched to say, eventually it gets to Michigan. We're just a little bit behind the curve on some of those things. So fundamentally, at the end of the day, yes. Whatever the government pays for, it absolutely controls and regulates. And they may give you a leash for a while, but then eventually they're going to dictate. Just real quick, and I'll try to make this super short. New York State, there are these Jewish schools, Hasidic schools, that 4 years ago started taking state funds. In 4 years that they've been doing it, now the state came in and said, you know what, we've been giving you money for 4 years, we need some accountability. We need to know what you've done with this money. And so they said, we need mandatory standardized testing for all the Hasidic schools because you're all receiving state funds. They didn't have that requirement before, but now because they're taking government money, they do. So they standardized tested all the students. On average, the students were below grade level. So they said, okay, well see, your students are behind grade level now, so now you have to use a public school curriculum. So what just happened? Was that school choice? Was that expanding opportunity for parents? What just happened is there's really only 2 islands of educational freedom: privately funded private schools and privately funded homeschools. They're the only 2 islands of educational freedom that exist in our country. But as soon as they're paid for with government tax dollars, now all of a sudden those islands are regulated by the government. So the Hasidic schools in New York are in court being prosecuted to basically have to teach a public school curriculum and have public school standardized testing. What's different about that than a public school? And it just took 4 years of them receiving government funding to lose their autonomy and their individuality. So that's the principle. We just need to understand that that's where it tends to go.
Can I ask one really quick follow-up? I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned all the tracking that's happening with the public school students. Is that also happening with the students that are part-time public school?
I'm going to say, to the best of my understanding, that depends on the district. So it could vary. I'm not 100% sure what's happening right here with that.
Virtual? Then yes, it was actually virtual.
And
Yes.
can you raise your hand over here, so whoever had a question? There we go. Thank you so much.
Okay, so my question was, if you have, like, your representative are definitely not wanting to listen to what you have to say, which at least one of mine is, I have emailed them both at least twice about this in the last month with no response. What would your approach be for people in districts where their representatives are definitely not interested in hearing what you have to say? Would you say to contact this, a different district that might have more, I guess, more hope, or meet with them during coffee hours or something? What would you say would be the next steps for that when they're unresponsive or antagonistic?
Yeah, thank you. Well, one thing for sure is find out when their coffee hours are, or they try to on their constituent days are usually Monday and Friday, and most try and meet with the public. They don't widely advertise it. It's kind of hard to find sometimes. If they're smart, they make it easy to find. And then I would tell you, don't go alone, but go with 10 other homeschool parents and some of their kids, and go and talk to them at their coffee hour. Introduce yourselves. Help her see. Some of them don't see a human face. They just think of it as an issue, a policy. You're putting a human face on it, and and that is very powerful. And you might not still change their mind, but at least they've seen another story and heard another story besides getting an email. That's one thing. But there's power in numbers, I will tell you. When they see, in fact, we've had reports back in some of the other districts after this happened with Representative Colazar. A lot of homeschool families went to Angela Whitmer's district, to Matt Colazar's district, and they're like, what? Angela, I think, asked Matt, what the heck happened? What were you talking about? I've got all these people coming to my coffee hour. I wasn't ready to, I don't know enough on this issue. So it is making an impact, so I would encourage you to do that, even though, I will tell you one quick thing. John Quincy Adams fought slavery for 17 years. After he was president, went back to the United States Congress. And he died on the floor of Congress, and the day he died, the person sitting next to him, his seatmate, and he was fighting slavery and kept getting asked, "Why are you doing this? It's going to get voted down. They hate you." They kept doing all kinds of things to John Quincy Adams. They didn't want to hear his voice. But the day he died, on the congressional floor, his seatmate was Abraham Lincoln. Wow. Who took up the baton, and we all know, what happened. So his statement, though, to his friends and even his enemies was, "I know that you don't want to pass this, but," he said, "duty is ours, the results are God's." So we can't tell you, we don't know for sure, that all of our voices will stop this bill from going through. But heck, I'm gonna try and make sure, do everything I possibly can. So thank you. Thank you for sending those emails. But my next step.
So if the lady over there would like to go visit Darren with me,
Absolutely.
we'll go visit.
Darren, he is the assistant majority leader in education. He represents the downriver area, and he was a former public school teacher. And he got a lot of parents in the downriver in Southern Wayne County very angry, because his total flat out, I sent him multiple letters of dismissal, and he kept them bringing in, "We need to protect Michigan students, we need to, protect them from abuse." I'm a Michigan foster care child. I grew up in foster care. My parents were foster parents for 21 years. They could not homeschool me. I was under the state care until I was 21 years old, even though, my parents legally adopted me because I had the medical care and they paid for my college. You're not protecting me by taking the rights away of homeschooling parents. You're basically hurting us. Because now the resources that should be coming to us, our foster kids, you're using it to come after homeschoolers. If you really want to protect children, you need to advocate for better care for CPS and foster care. And not spending thousands of tax dollars. I tell them you're spending thousands of dollars of tax dollars coming after CPS or after homeschooling families. And you should be using those money to make sure that children like us are actually truly protected. I don't know a single, homeschool family that has ever abused their child, but I can tell you, growing up in the public schools, I know a lot of kids who are abused, including myself. And we need to, and this is why I get so emotional, because this is my children's future.
Well, I would not lose that emotion, by the way. I want to reiterate what Eileen said, in kind of what I said earlier about what motivates these guys and girls, one of them is people, their constituents. And I'm going to be honest with you, Senator Camilleri, he's probably not going to be swayed by you or you. And by the way, I want to see if that actually is on tape somewhere, because one of the things we do is accountability, so we can talk after this meeting. But if you, and then, like Eileen said, then 10 of your friends and 10 of your friends go over there and start to make some
Yeah,
noise.
he went to Bob Joe's Cluster in Trenton, and over the summer he had a meeting here. It was during COVID, because here in Wayne County specifically, every Wednesday they would send out like a new forum to parent or to the schools, like these are the rules. And they were masking 2-year-olds here in Wayne County. My daughter said to me,
I saw that
she
stuff.
had to get masked. She had to wear a mask in order to get speech therapy. I'm like, this is so counterproductive. The speech therapist wrote a letter, and he's like, if you don't like it, you can move. And this on video, it was a Facebook Live. I mean, everybody,
Well, you and I are going to be friends after this meeting. But like the other thing is, let me tell you something. Like these guys are up for re-election not this year, but 2 years. The senators, yes. And it might not be a lot of these senators, particularly when they have 4-year terms, or anybody that has a 4-year term. They do a lot of their like hard and fast stuff in their first year, maybe their second year. Why? Well, because people will forget about it, right? You haven't forgotten, neither have you, and we don't want them to forget either at AFP. What we do, and it's not to be self-serving, but like we take that stuff because most people have never probably heard about that, not at all. And they don't want other people to know that they've just dismissed a constituent, like, oh, well, if you don't like it, move. Can you imagine if someone on the other side said something like that? Just like the media reporting, the newspapers, social media. See, people will take a lot of things for granted, but they will not take an elected official telling the people that elected them or not to go, jump in the river. That is what moves these politicians, particularly when they go out of left field somewhere and tell you to do something like that. And then, more importantly, during an election year, now they're double. I mean, Israel has a quote up there from Rep. Kolazar, literally verbatim. I saw the tweet, we shared it, and then a week later, he's like, "Oh, I didn't say that at all." Do you think we're stupid? It's literally right there. This isn't 30 years ago where there was no social media. Unfortunately, the internet lives forever. Not only do we have to be careful what you have to say, but you guys better be careful what you have to say, because this stuff doesn't go away. And so they're going to try to make you guys look the fool. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't give up. And so, definitely what Eileen said, go take yourself, go take your families, go take your friends' families, go down there and say, hey, by the way, we're still here, and we have not forgotten. I'll see you on election day, et cetera, et cetera.
And use some of our talking points that we gave you on this sheet. Say, golly, tragically, there is evidence 31% of our enrolled public school students are routinely missing from the classroom, and 68% in the Detroit public schools. I think we should concentrate on that.
Yeah, there was a press release that went out this morning from both Representative Mike Harris and Representative Jamie Green. And they both were talking about how there's been an initiative that they have been wanting to create that's bipartisan to focus on safety of children in the public schools. And they both issued press releases yesterday, I guess it was, saying that the Democrats completely stonewalled the initiative and are not allowing it to move forward. And they said it's like the irony, right, of they're calling for additional regulations on homeschoolers, claiming there's a massive safety issue, and yet safety of the children is the #1 reason people are choosing to homeschool in the United States, according to a study from HSLDA. The #1 reason parents are homeschooling is physical safety of the child. Bullying, sexual abuse in the classroom, school shootings, all of those things are major reasons why parents are getting their kids out. And so, the Republicans are saying, hey, we want to work across the aisle with the Democrats to create better safety measures to protect kids in public schools, and the Democrats completely stonewalled them. Every Democrat has opposed it, just because it's a partisan politics issue. So, because the Republicans want it, right? So.
If I can add on a very practical level back to the question here, going to coffee hours is really great. Also making phone calls tend to get replies a little bit faster. And it's still good to send letters. If you send a handwritten letter, it stands out a lot more. If you tuck in a drawing from your child or a student letter, it will really stand out. And then make sure in your communication that you ask for a reply. If you want to reply back, don't just write a letter and say, these are my thoughts, thank you for listening. Say, I want to know what you think about this and what you're going to do about this. I look forward to your response, and I look forward to a follow-up conversation. Please call me at this number. Because we need to be clear in our expectations and make sure they understand we're waiting for that call back. And if they don't call back, after a week or so, give their office a call and say, hey, I wrote a letter and I asked for a call back and I didn't get one. Keep that pressure on, keep following up, and then also, everybody likes to hear not just negative, hey, you should be doing this. They want to hear the good too. And there's a ministry in Lansing where individuals actually go in and they knock on a legislative office door and say, hey, can I pray with you today? How can I pray for you? You guys don't live right next door to Lansing, but meet up with your legislator. If you go to their coffee hour and ask one question, how can I pray for you? You will build a relationship with that person regardless of what their religious affiliation is. You will build a relationship with them who's like, hey, this is a friendly person, they actually care about me. And someone who does something like that, it completely disarms when a legislator's on the defense and they feel like they've got to have their thick skin on. You want to pray for me? Really? You're going to start to penetrate that and build a relationship. And when you have a relationship, they're going to care what you think. And so try, some people might bake cookies and go to their coffee hour or whatever, but whatever works for you, build that relationship because it really, really is very important. And then keep that relationship regular. Keep following up. Every month or two, reach out and, maybe you share something positive. Thank them for something good. And then don't be afraid to petition what you're asking for. Keep it well balanced, if that makes sense. Oh, yes.
Hi. Geez, I hope I can get this out right. I think that I want my legislator to know that I am extremely passionate about homeschool freedom. I want them to know that I value my rights to direct the education of my children, and I don't think that anything should change. But on an equal measure, I think approaching this from a compassionate standpoint of, yes, we care. I'm recognizing this is total misdirection, honestly. I recognize they're misdirecting information and they're coming at this from a stance of abuse there's not any correlation between whether you're public school, private school, homeschool, zero correlation, whether or not there's going to be an increase in abuse. I understand that. But if this is the stance that you're taking on this, legislators, this is something that we care about as a community. I have not seen so many people who are fiercely desirous to protect not just their children, but children in general as homeschoolers and as Christians. We desire to protect the young and the innocent and to protect children. So I think my question is, if those in Lansing, if their language is money, if their language is what is their language to start these types of conversations? And is there a place for funds to be shifted towards CPS and towards helping the foster care system and towards helping prevent kids getting sent back into abusive environments and help directing funds towards I'm honestly is there a strategy that I can talk to my legislators about and being this is not where your funds should be going? I know that for 100% certain. I can argue that from a standpoint. But where can you put this to help? And is there funds to be put towards something to help?
Sorry. That was a bucket. Sorry.
I mean, that's just kind of what the Republicans were just doing. They had an initiative to say we want to make the public schools more safe, and the Dems stonewalled.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult thing with the politics we have. Just on the safety issue, I'd like to say a few things. First of all, Mission has had a statement on our website for years condemning child abuse and giving links to provide help for situations where real child abuse is taking place. So we don't want to see any kind of environment where there's a legal protection for child abusers. We don't want there to be a loophole in the law that allows for child abuse. But we already have really adequate laws on child abuse on the books in Michigan. And people who violate those laws need to be prosecuted under those laws. We don't need to just create endless new regulations all the time. We need to prosecute criminals with the laws that we already have and enforce the laws that we have. And there are already really good protocols that exist within programs like CPS that they ignore. Again, back to the Roman Lopez case that was talked about in the Washington Post. When I was talking to Peter Jamison, I told him, I said, you're making this a homeschool story, and it's really more of a CPS story. And he said, well, to your point, he said, actually, the aunt of that little boy, when he still lived in Michigan, told me that she called CPS multiple times to report suspected child abuse, and CPS never even showed up to investigate. So you have a point there. I'm like, Peter, why is that not your story? And so, you know, that, again, they have protocols, and they don't follow them. So I don't think we need new laws. We need them to do their job. We need them to follow the laws that we already have.
But is that a strategic, I guess, is that a strategic, if I'm coming, is that a strategy as homeschoolers in the redirect? How can I redirect your attention? Because you're barking up the wrong tree. I know you're barking up the wrong tree. What tree should you be barking up?
We actually have a whole sheet on this, parental rights words that work, how to talk about healthy families, justice, and caring for kids, how to lead with compassion. So each of these are points like, you want them to support strong, healthy families, and assert that parents know their children best, and how to advocate for justice and things like that. This is just to kind of get you started. And these other documents, and especially one, how to have strategic conversations with legislators, we detail some specific things that you can ask for, but this is a really good one-pager, and then, you know, make your own arguments, but I'll pass it off to Sean.
Well, and that's exactly right. You know, I know my organization might be a little bit more aggressive on some of the things, but one-on-one, if you ever get so fortuitous as to talk with a legislator directly at a coffee hour or in their office, or maybe even their staff, you know, fire and brimstone is just not going to work. They're going to tell you, okay, great, thanks for playing, have a good day. There is something to be said about the idea of killing them with kindness. More than that, though, it's when you have an intelligent, articulate point, like when you're talking about, like, how about we enforce the laws that are on the books, and you challenge them a little bit. You know, let me tell you something. Most of these guys and girls, you know, everyone in there is elected office. They have some passion points. That's great. Very few people specialize in everything. That's literally not sustainable. You can, an individual legislator cannot know everything about anything that's going on in every single bill in every single chamber. That's absurd. But when they make these talking points, say, oh, well, you know, someone told me this, or oh, my staffer told me this, or well, you know, the caucus said, hey, we should go down this road. They might not even know why. So if you walk into their room, or you walk into their whatever, you're on a phone call with them, and you say, well, why don't you tell me why? You know, a great debate tactic is actually putting the position back on the individual. You know, if you know what you're talking about, you turn around them and say, hey, you know, I noticed you introduced this bill, or I noticed you made a couple of statements about this bill. Can you explain a little bit to me about why you think this is true or false? Because, you know, I'm a homeschooling parent, and I'm just curious about your rationale. Watch. They will, you know, well, you know, I just, you know, I think it's very important that people are protected. Oh, cool, what is that? You know what I'm saying? So put it back on them. Remember, you need to be educated, so you can actually have that conversation with them. You can be respectful and kind, tactful in everything you do. But a lot of these guys and girls, they might not know. It's just like kind of what they were told, or they heard it on the news, like, oh yeah, we should protect kids. Yeah, no kidding. But they might not actually have the details about it. And then when you say, well, actually, I am a homeschool parent. I am living in this community. Like was said earlier, you put a face to a name to a story. You know, I'm not going to tell you they're going to switch their vote because they've got a lot of other things, a lot of other pressures, but it might say, you know what, I am curious about this. Or you can have a scenario with Justice Bernstein back in the day who actually thought about it for a bit, but you know what, I don't think I took the right vote on this, you know. You will never know. Like was said earlier, you know, duty is ours. That's all you have to worry about. Whatever will happen, that's God's responsibility. But if you had these conversations with these individuals, and I'm telling you the truth, most of these guys and girls, even the sponsors of some of these bills, are not an expert on this stuff. They might never even talk to you before. I had the whole characterization of homeschooling families before I was enlightened, so to speak, all right? And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't know unless you know, right? So go in there, have those one-on-one conversations, challenge their arguments respectfully and tactfully, say, well, what do you mean when you say da-da-da? And just see what they do, and then be ready for a response. I was in ministry for years, and this is very similar. Politics and ministry are very, very similar, you guys. It's just people. Jesus-style ministry is meeting people where they are. Know your material, know what you're wanting to say, and then just, have a conversation. And if they tell you, well, just move, then we can have some fun on the other side. So,
We know that you're probably getting ready to get going. So last question, we'll make it really quick. If you feel like you need to leave, you are not hurting our feelings. This went a bit longer than we thought, but some great questions. So we hate to cut you off, but I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm stuck here either. But go ahead, last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit more information in regard to the coffee hours. I'm struggling because a lot of my homeschool community is not in my district for representative. And I want to go to a coffee hour, but I want to do it with people. Is that an issue if I have them come with me, even though they're not in my specific district?
Not at all, no. And especially if it's like Stephanie Shang and Dan Camilleri, or Darren Camilleri, they are in different, they're in like the education, you were saying the education policy committee. Well, they're representing, everyone on these policies. That's why you're assigned to a committee, that should kind of be your specialty. So I wouldn't worry about it if they're not exactly in that district.
and even if they push you back, who cares? Like, their law, they say, oh, we're not constituency voice in the county. Well, yeah, because the laws you're making affect everybody in the state. So, if you're going to vote for this, that affects me. Don't let them like push you away with, oh, well, you're not a constituent, so you're putting this in the county. Yeah, I'm not going to vote for you, but the law does, and we're here to talk about the law. So, that answers your question.
Thank you.
All right, let's just take a minute for closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this opportunity we have to gather. We thank you for this church being willing to open up and allow us to meet here. We just know that you are ultimately our King, that you are sovereign over everything. And so, God, we commit this situation to you. We trust your leading and guiding. We know that you care about our children even more than we do. And so, Lord, we pray that you would not allow us to give in to fear, because we know that's not from you, but that you would give us love, power, and a sound mind. Lord, we ask for you to show yourself strong on our behalf and give us wisdom to know what we should do and how to respond in a way that pleases you. So we commit all this to you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank you all. We'll be back.